the other things about innovation that I think is really interesting is that if your procurement cycle is slower than your innovation cycle, you're always buying out-of-date technology. We're walking around the base of the space shuttle, my wife and I, with all the other astronauts and their spouses. My wife is a professional pilot. She flies 787s for Air Canada. And I remember distinctly walking around, looking up at the orbiter, thinking, this is absolutely incredible. Tomorrow, I'm going to go on my second space flight. We're halfway around, and Kathy says to me, Dave, you do realize that every part went to the lowest bidder, right? That's something you guys are in charge of, and let's talk about that because it's really important. We appreciate the great work that you put into making sure that we're safe when we go off and do this. And basically, from my perspective, I'd say the procurement challenge we got into is confusing cost with value. So they went with the cheapest possible bid, and that bid did not actually include verifying that the mirror was ground to the perfect specifications on the ground before it got launched into space. So with this level of redundancy, how did we end up losing Challenger? Well, the day of liftoff, it was in January 1986, that's a photograph of the space shuttle on the day of liftoff. We're in Canada. We're kind of used to seeing icicles on things, but we know that airplanes should not have ice hanging off when you want to go fly in an airplane, let alone spacecraft. You don't want to have icicles hanging off your spacecraft. So the temperature the day of launch was actually 26 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. At the time of launch, it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And the engineers at Thiokol said to NASA management, you should not launch this vehicle unless the temperatures are 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Why did this happen? So milestone targets, milestone-based contracts, are all based on hitting these various targets. If the company does not hit the targets, bottom line, they don't get paid until they hit the target. So the onus is on the company to solve the problem and to be able to come in a cost-effective manner ahead of schedule. Well, let's talk about failure in the context of procurement, because nobody in this room wants to be involved in a situation where things don't work properly. Well, what about Sierra Nevada and the Dream Chaser, small version of essentially the space shuttle that was designed to take crew to the International Space Station, was developed as a COTS contract with NASA. And unfortunately, one of the milestones that they had to hit was successful landing. And you can see this Dream Chaser coming into land. But the important message in this is failure was okay. They continued to develop the vehicle, and they pivoted, and now they're developing this vehicle as a cargo transport vehicle to the space station to space. So failure in a milestone contract model is actually acceptable. We can grow from this and learn and do things differently. The bottom line is to make sure we let the experts do what experts do, come up with the design requirements, and we follow and adhere to the requirements we put in place. As you know, and you guys are more expert on this than I am, there's a wide spectrum in contracting opportunities that have a degree of risk associated with them. I am a huge fan for the middle of the pack. I really like the milestone fixed price model that NASA is currently using for commercial orbital transportation. NASA has really revised its core principles to define the outcome, let the market find the path, use this milestone-based model to come up with something that's truly going to be faster, better, cheaper, and allow us to save billions that can be reinvested in other programs. And one of the things that I learned as a hospital CEO, I learned the hard way. The IT supplier for our hospital called us up and said, oh, by the way, we're giving you 1 year mandatory notice that we're getting out of the hospital IT business. That's a $60 million unbudgeted impact that we had to figure out. So we did what everybody would do. We put out an RFP for another vendor for an IT system, and then we realized that we don't care who the IT system provider is. What we really want to do is find a partner. So we canceled that RFP. We looked at what the outcome that we wanted, and we RFP'd for a partner. We found another hospital, and we were an extension of the IT system for the Markham-Stouffville Hospital. And now all the patients in 5 hospital networks all have a common IT platform that they're a part of. So understanding what you really want and making sure that we create a different procurement model is something that helps us achieve value and create success. I think many of us probably recognize that in the beginning of World War II, Canada had a very modest Navy. One of the other things about innovation that I think is really interesting is that if your procurement cycle is slower than your innovation cycle, you're always buying out-of-date technology. And think about this, you know, the rate of technological evolution today is measured in months to years, and in some cases our procurement cycle can be measured in years to decades. So there's an obvious mismatch there, and we have to figure that out. You know, I think many of us probably recognize that in the beginning of World War II, Canada had a very modest Navy. Our Navy was actually quite small. 5 years later, within a scope of 5 years, we went from being one of the smallest navies in the world to having the third largest Navy in the world. An absolutely incredible achievement by D&D. But the point is we need to challenge ourselves to think about what that procurement cycle is like and how we can bridge the way in which we can procure new innovation through innovative procurement and giving the teams the resources they need to be able to go out and ensure that we're getting the best possible value for our dollar. But one of the things I had an opportunity to do when I was Director of Space and Life Sciences was create an underwater research platform, and we were simply just able to do this. We did this in less than 6 months, where NASA collaborated with NOAA, 2 major US government agencies worked together to provide the Aquarius Undersea Research Habitat as a research platform for space station astronauts. So within 6 months, we did the first mission, NEEMO-1, in 2001. I was on that mission, but I was the commander of NEEMO-9 in 2006. And this was what we call a pay-to-play model. We approached various private sector entities and we said, do you want to be part of this? And all the collaborators on the bottom said yes. So we enabled them to work together collaboratively to do research on an undersea research platform that one day will help us in space. Canada is a major spacefaring nation because we developed the robotic arm for the space shuttle that we used to repair Hubble, used to inspect the tiles after we lost the space shuttle Columbia. But more importantly, Canadarm enabled us to deliver Canadarm2 to the International Space Station, which we were able to build in space. We went into space on a 16-day mission, I should say, to look at how the brain and body adapted to being in space. And on my second space flight, I went from being a neuroscientist in space to actually being a spacewalker and going outside to help build the International Space Station. We've only had 4 Canadians that have done spacewalks. Chris Hadfield has done 2, David Saint-Jacques did 1, Steve McLean did 1, and I did 3. So we're hoping when Josh Kutrick goes to the space station, he'll get a chance to do 4 or 5 and get the new record for doing spacewalks in Canada. We train underwater in the world's largest indoor swimming pool. We like to joke and call it that, but it's called the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, and we have a mock-up of the space station. If we're doing Hubble missions, we do Hubble Space Telescope mock-up underwater, and everything that we do in space, the choreography for the spacewalk, is actually trained and rehearsed underwater. So Clay Anderson is on the left-hand side of this slide. I'm on the right-hand side, and we're installing a simulated antenna on the truss of the space station. We did this training session about 1.5 years before we actually did the spacewalk in space, and it was a truly remarkable experience. Tracy Caldwell was the orchestra conductor of our spacewalks. Whenever we have people outside doing spacewalks, we have what we call the IVA, the intravehicular crew person, who will be there to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time. And to emphasize the importance of speaking up, at the end of this, we're in the debrief, and Paul Bohm, who you can see behind Tracy, said, so how do you guys think it went? And we're going, oh, it went fantastic. Tracy says, yeah, no, guys, if we do today, if we do in space what we did today, we're not going to succeed. And I said, why? And I said, Tracy said, well, Dave, you were off doing your thing. Rick, you were doing your thing. Nobody was listening to me. She spoke up. She had a followership moment, and that changed the way we trained together. And that when we ultimately went to space as a crew, we did 4 flawless spacewalks, made no mistakes, we're ahead on the timeline. It takes time and trust to build a relationship to enable followership to take place, but followership is critical for us to being able to succeed in doing the things that we want to be able to do. So leadership. Values disagreements. This is one of the books that I have available, but in the book I talk about one of the core principles at NASA in creating peak performing teams is we value disagreement. We value diversity. We embrace it. We want to hear the disparate perspective. I love that when the Prime Minister was interviewing the Artemis II crew and he said, this is just the beginning. Canada is a major spacefaring nation, and we were thrilled that Jeremy Hansen was part of the Artemis II crew, the first humans to go back to the moon since the Apollo program finished in the 1970s. It was a remarkable mission by all accounts, And fortunately, I had dinner with the Artemis II crew probably about 3 weeks ago now. They did an incredible job. It was unbelievable to watch it go into space. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. In the VIP viewing area, you're 3.5 miles away from the launch pad. And most of the VIPs, they get out of the buses and they come over to the bleachers and they sit down and they go, "That's it? Wait, like that thing way, way over there?" And everybody says, "Yeah." And they say, we're in the VIP section. We're supposed to be closer. And then as soon as the main engines and the solid rocket boosters ignite, they're all going, "We're too close. Who put us here? This is craziness." Because you feel the ground shaking beneath you. Your clothes are shaking with the vibration of the sound that's transmitted over 3.5 miles. So the Orion spacecraft, truly spectacular when it gets to space. And of course, in low Earth orbit, they just did a couple of orbits in low Earth orbit before they did the translunar injection burn. And I was talking to Reed Wiseman, their commander. Guess who did the translunar injection burn, the critical burn to set this crew on the course to the moon? Jeremy Hansen. That was phenomenal that Reed said, "Jeremy, do the burn." And not all commanders would necessarily do that, but it speaks volume to the skills that Jeremy brought to the table. Great shot of the Orion capsule with the moon and the Earth in the background. And it does help emphasize the fact that we live on this pale blue dot, this global village, that we're all in this together. And I love this quote by Victor Glover. "In all this emptiness, there's a whole bunch of nothing. In this thing called the universe, you have this oasis, this beautiful blue oasis, this planet that we live on, and we're all here together." But in thinking about what it's like flying in space, it's nice to be able to see the videos. Orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, so traveling 25 times the speed of sound, or 8 kilometers a second, you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. And you come to realize that the Earth, in fact, is a very small place. If you've been watching carefully, this image behind me has been changing. And it's in fact emulating what it would be like if we were all in space together, looking out the window of the space station. And you're only going to make it 2/3 of the way around the planet. But I love this quote by Kurt Vonnegut, because he says, "Out on the edge you can see all kinds of things you can't see from the center. There are no borders between countries we can see from space." Quite clearly, we're all in this together, living on this global village, this beautiful blue oasis of our planet cast against the infinite void of space. And we recognize that the pandemic hasn't taught us anything. It taught us that what happens in one part of the world affects the entire planet. And the challenge that we have today is the geopolitical situation is changing, one from a position that I would call globalism to more national interests. And I would say that a globalist perspective does not preclude national interests, but going forward and exploring space, we do it on the behalf of humanity. And I think the Artemis II crew captured that really well.